Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Swiss Show. Today, I am your host, Ryan Tuckwood, and I'm over the moon to be joined by somebody that I met roughly 2 years ago, I think, firstly, and somebody who's had a profound impact on my life, just because of the way that you communicate, the way you interact, and the sincerity and everything that you deliver. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through your bio, Luke, and I'm going to give you the welcome that I think you deserve, and then we're just going to see where the hell this goes for the next half an hour or so.
All right.
Mate, I believe for over 9 years you served as a psychologist in the Australian Defence Force, attaining the rank of Major, which is pretty bloody cool. You provided counselling to a range of people in the ADF, covering a diverse range of mental health issues, with a strong interest in the treatment of stress, anxiety, depression, phobias, and trauma. It's quite a range. He's got a strong knowledge base and skill set in evidence-based psychological therapies, including cognitive behaviour therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy with mindfulness. Talk about a mouthful for me. He's a Psychology Board of Australia approved supervisor who enjoys being involved in the development of other mental health professionals. When I read that, I really liked that because as a sales professional myself, I actually get a real buzz out of helping other people become the best version they can, which is obviously the same sort of manner. Through your ADF career, you provided specialist advice to inform the Army officers in the recruitment process. In this role, you developed a curiosity in marketing activity that was employed to attract people to the ADF, which involved, I guess, a passion for marketing / consumer psychology, which is a really interesting change, which I want to find out about. Luke has worked closely with various startup companies as well as mental health charity Living. A lot of you might have listened to the podcast that we did with Sam Webb recently, which was tremendously well received. And you've helped them develop a more effective marketing communications, and you now educate businesses on how to spot any signs of mental health challenges in the workforce, amongst many other things. Luke, mate, how are you?
I'm good, mate.
How's that for an intro?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah?
It's good. It's good to hear.
Is it strange to hear all that back, or are you kind of used to the introductions now? I know for me, when I hear a big long-winded intro, it's like, oh, I've done a fair bit.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now, because I don't get introduced to that extent often. So it is, mate. It's good to hear it and reflect on the things that I've done, because I think you take a lot of things for granted in life. I particularly took a lot of my ADF experience for granted.
Okay.
And it's something that I've been reflecting on more and more recently, particularly as I reconnect with a lot of veterans.
Yeah.
And we share stories, and I think, damn, I did a lot in the military, and damn, I got blessed with a lot of opportunity that not a lot of people get blessed with, particularly psychologists. And I joined the military at a time, so 2009 I joined, and the war in the Middle East was certainly pretty extreme, pretty intensive from a combat perspective, so I joined at a fascinating time. Yeah, it was a marvellous career, and obviously since leaving Defence I've done some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
You mentioned Living, that's been very, very different, but also equally appealing and attractive in terms of the outputs that I get to achieve.
So take us all the way back then. So you joined the ADF in 2009.
Yep.
Where does that come from? Like, is it in the family? What's the background?
My pop did serve in World War One, but to be honest, I wouldn't say that we're a military family by any stretch of the imagination. I wasn't the best uni student. I excelled in high school up until about year 10, and then developed a much bigger preference for sport and for socialising. So I didn't really achieve to the ability that I probably should have in year 12, which meant that I couldn't get into a Sydney university to do psychology. Yeah, you needed about a 97 UAI because it was so popular back then. So I ended up moving to Coffs Harbour and completed my degree over 5 years when it should have taken 4 years, because I missed a lot of classes because I preferred surfing and online gaming and just hanging out, having fun. had a couple of mates from Sydney actually move to Coffs Harbour with me just to join in the fun, which was kind of cool. But I eventually completed my psych degree and I thought, what the hell do I do now? And my old man actually said that he'd spoken to one of his good friends who had a daughter who was exploring what she wanted to do with her psychology degree, and she'd stumbled across the military. She didn't actually join the military, but as soon as Dad said that, I looked into army psychology and went,
yeah, wow.
Fitness, camaraderie, wonderful internship. You don't have to actually pay for your internship. You get paid to do your internship, and the rest is history, mate.
And why psychology in the first place?
I find people fascinating.
Yeah, okay.
I really do, and I always have since. Well, Mum tells me even as a young tucker, I always question things. Why? Why? So I think I had a natural curiosity for why things are the way they are, why people behave the way they do, and that never left me. So that drew me to psychology, but also found throughout high school I had a lot of mates that, you know, everyone experiences challenges in life, and people going through high school are not immune to challenges. I mean, you think about high school at the moment, COVID-19, there's a lot of people struggling. But when I was going through high school, some of my mates, all boys Catholic school, certainly had some major challenges, and for some reason they often spoke to me and I enjoyed listening to them. I could sit there patiently and listen to them. So when I weighed up my interest in human behaviour and my ability to sit there and listen to people and be present, it kind of drew me to psychology, and I applied and ended up moving to Coffs Harbour. And
I imagine those two traits, being able to listen and be present, are the most powerful traits you need to be in your field, right?
Yeah, amongst the most powerful, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the ability to genuinely listen is a very powerful skill in life, not just as a psychologist, but a powerful skill in life. And it's interesting. I run a training program called Checkmate. It's a 6-hour program, and part of the program is a test on your listening skills, and most people overestimate their ability to listen.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so it's a skill that a lot of people think they are good at, but unfortunately the statistics, particularly when I run this survey and this Checkmate program, suggest otherwise. People are often distracted by the clock, email notifications going off on their laptop, social media notifications going off in their pocket. They struggle to genuinely listen, and oftentimes they're caught up in their own head, problem solving, going into a fix-it mentality, providing advice, guidance. Whilst they're doing all of that, they're not actually listening.
Yeah. So they're already 2 steps ahead.
2 steps
instead
ahead.
Of being present.
They're not present. They're not listening to what the person is saying in front of them.
Has that? So you're in the ADF for 9 years. How long have you been out for?
I got out in February 2017.
Okay, so 12, 13 years in total. So since you started, right? So 2009.
Yeah.
So we go over a decade. There's been lots of changes in technology with everything that's going on. Has that attention span obviously diminished? I know we talk about it, but have you seen it with people? Our ability to listen and be present, as it got worse?
I don't know the evidence behind that, but you think about the number of distractions in life, and it's a very complex world at the moment. The world we live in is very, very complex. You think about social media, you think about the busyness of people's lives. I would say there are more distractions now than ever before, and there's only going to be more distractions moving into the future.
Yeah.
You look at the rate of innovation in technology, and by gee, who knows what the future holds. Could be brilliant, it could be
Pretty scary.
terrifying.
Yeah.
who knows?
So how do we filter then? Is it a skill for us to be able to learn to listen? Because this is really pertinent for us, and this is why I wanted to talk to you. I had a great conversation with Sam, obviously the co-founder of Living as well, and the journey that he's been on.
Yeah, wonderful fella. One of my very, very close friends.
Yeah, and you guys, you complement each other really well, because you're. And this is not saying that Sam isn't, but you're an evidence-based psychologist. And even when I asked you that, your instant response was, "I don't have the evidence behind it." Right?
Yeah, I didn't even mean to say that. It's just part of my vernacular.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Which I love. So this goes hand in hand with being. We're sales professionals, right? And we always say that you've got to listen, you've got to truly absorb and understand people's wants and needs. So from your perspective, can we learn it?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
And I learnt it. I'll tell you a story. Can I tell you a story?
Absolutely, yeah.
So back when I was an intern psychologist, so straight from civilian street, moving into the military, I was an intern psychologist. Part of becoming a registered psychologist, in other words, a psychologist where you can go off and do your own thing without a supervisor being present. Part of that process involves a lot of supervision. And I had a really strict supervisor. I'm still good mates with this supervisor, but he was very, very strict. And the process involved, client would knock on the door, I'd greet the client enthusiastically, wanting to sink my teeth into counselling. I'd bring the client into my office. He or she would sit in front of me. I'd tell them to wait a minute, go grab my supervisor. My supervisor would sit behind me and watch everything that I did and said. And it's an interesting situation. It kind of feels a little bit artificial. You've got a distressed person in front of you, which is confronting enough. And then you've got a senior psychologist, very experienced psychologist, sitting behind you, observing everything that you do. And it always made me really, really nervous. I was never in my natural element in that environment. And this process for me went on longer than a lot of my colleagues. He persisted and persisted with me. I don't know if that was because I was an average intern psychologist or if he just wanted to give me the best possible training he could. And I'm glad he persisted, because I remember on this one occasion, this young female rocked up to the psychology section, and the process unfolded. She knocked on the door, I greeted her, brought her into the office, she sat in front of me. I told her to wait a second, went and got my senior psychologist, who was a male. He sat behind me, breathing down my neck, watching everything that I did and said, and I got really, really nervous. In response to my nervousness, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this when they're confronted by somebody who might be struggling, in response to my nervousness, I was asking this client question after question after question, throwing in some advice, some guidance. As soon as there was a moment of silence, a lot of people get really uncomfortable when there's silence, and I certainly did early in my career. I filled the silence with more advice, more guidance. The whole time in my head I was thinking, how do I fix this person in front of me? How do I make her better? Problem solving in my own head. The whole time I was doing that, the less I was listening to her. And this went on for about 60 minutes. She eventually left. And I went to write up my clinical notes, as you do after you see a client. And I was sitting there in front of the computer and I thought, I didn't hear a word that she said. I've got no idea what to write here. And my supervisor approached me and said, Luke, let me give you some advice. And you probably heard me tell this story in the Living Well when I came in and delivered the training to your team. But he said to me, Luke, when it comes to helping people, slow down the advice giving. And then he said something I'll never forget. He goes, when it comes to helping someone, listen twice as much as you speak. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. And I never ever forgot that advice. And the really powerful thing about being present and genuinely listening to somebody, and you might not know this from your sales experience, if you genuinely listen to them, they often tell you exactly what they want, exactly what they need. But it takes that insight to slow down, to slow down everything that might be going through your head, that fix-it mentality, that problem-solving mentality, that desire to talk and to provide advice and guidance. It takes insight. The moment you realise you're doing that is the start of becoming a better listener.
So you have to recognise the triggers first.
Absolutely,
right? So,
absolutely. The moment you realise that you're caught up in your own head, or you're talking too much, you're butting in, you're intervening, your mind's wandering, the moment you can realise that that's happening is the moment that you can bring yourself back to the present moment and listen to the person genuinely.
And is that only learnt through experience? Can we teach that to somebody on day one in sales, or day one as a psychologist? We can make them aware of it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. I think it takes a lot of practice. For example, you might be on the phone, Ryan, you might be talking to a client, and you might start thinking about your child or your wife or your car being parked in a 2-hour zone. The moment you realise that that's happening, pause, 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you speak. Yeah. So I think even by just listening to me now, people can start that journey because they will notice when it's happening.
Yeah.
They will notice when it's happening.
For sure. Okay. And then what about, and again, this crosses over really nicely into sales for us, which again is why this is perfect. What type of questions can we ask then of people if they're not opening up? They're just not giving us anything. So I'm like, well, I need to fill this void. We can't both sit here in silence. And I'm sure we've all had that scenario. So is there specific, I know there's motivational interviewing and specific questions that we can ask.
Yep.
Have you got any sort of advice around that?
Always encourage people to ask open-ended questions. So a good example would be, hey Ryan, I've noticed you're a little bit fatigued at the moment. How are you going? As opposed to, I've noticed you're a little bit fatigued. Are you okay? So nice open-ended questions typically open people up. It gives them A, an opportunity to pause and reflect, and B, the privilege to actually respond to your question in an open manner. So I think open-ended questions are brilliant. If people are remaining silent, they're resistant to your questions, I call them out. What's going on here, mate? I notice I'm asking you a lot of questions, but you don't seem to be providing me with any responses. Let's talk through it. What's going on? Am I asking the wrong questions?
Interesting, yeah.
Call it out. Call it out and see what they have to say.
I like this. So you owned it. You said, am I asking the wrong questions?
Am I asking the wrong questions?
Yeah.
I'm asking questions that are offending you. I'm asking questions that are too personal. Should we start somewhere else? I'd call it out. I've had some, mate, in my career, I've had some very, very resistant clients. You think about a commander referring a soldier to me to assess them.
That's where my head was going in the army. Yeah.
So you got a commander who is struggling with a soldier, for example, and they don't know what to do with them. So oftentimes they refer them to the psychologist. The psychologist will have all the answers, and the psychologist will be able to open them up and get all the answers that I need to manage them. And they've walked into my office and they've sat there and not wanted to talk to me. And I've sat there in silence for as long as it's required. And I've called them out. Mate, we can sit here in silence, or we can try and achieve an outcome here. Where do we begin?
Yeah, wow.
Where do we begin? And you might even start lightly. How long have you been in the military for? What's your highlight? What's your low light? What do you think's brought you here today?
So it's almost a level of rapport building first, right? You're trying to create a connection so they feel comfortable to share information with you.
Rapport, therapeutic alliance. It's really interesting. There's some research out there that suggests, and I'm sure some people would challenge me on this, but I've read enough research that suggests that the therapeutic alliance, or in other words, the rapport between clinician and client, is the most important thing for effective therapeutic outcomes.
Wow.
Years of practice, the therapeutic approach, so whether it's it's acceptance and commitment therapy, CBT, CPT, IPT, whatever the treatment approach. Your level of experience across different industries, all of that is surpassed by the therapeutic alliance, your ability to build rapport in terms of therapeutic outcomes.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, obviously, competence features in your ability to build rapport. Like if you sit there as what appears to be an incompetent psychologist, that will absolutely impact on the therapeutic alliance. But if you've got some level of competence and the person in front of you understands that you're competent at your job, and then you're relatable and rapport is strong, that is fundamentally the most important thing in therapy.
Yeah, wow. I love that
Which
language.
is really interesting.
Yeah,
it's really, really interesting.
Because and it is, you said it earlier, you had an interest in human beings and human behaviour.
Yep.
And for us, the interest in human behaviour is buying behaviours.
Yep.
So, and buying, they're buying you first, right, as a psychologist. Like, I don't want to go and see that guy. I'm fine. I'm assuming you've heard that many times.
I'm all good, I'm fine.
Yeah, no, I don't need to talk to him. Well, what does he know?
Yeah.
So you've got to connect with them as quickly as possible.
Yep.
Do they? I'm assuming you get a lot of training with regards to this, but how is that transitioning to the workplace, what you're doing right now with Living in Checkmate? You're going into businesses, you're doing the Living Well programs. Are you finding as much resistance from business owners or managers or even staff members?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. People these days are very, very conscious of mental health and very open, I think, to organisations coming in and providing training. I think many people now, in terms of their mental health literacy, it's improved, and people understand that mental health and mental ill health is an issue that needs to be addressed. Not only to provide a safe environment to your organisation and to keep people alive and to keep people in the workforce, but in terms of return on investment, there's no disputing that if you've got a mentally healthy workplace, your business is more profitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we obviously brought you in to do the Living Well program for our team, and we still talk about it, we still rave about it, which is obviously
and
why
your profits have gone through the roof,
profits
no
have gone
doubt. Yeah,
crazy. Yeah, we had to stop making sales.
Yeah.
So how did that come about in the first place? Where was your connection with Living, and then obviously subsequently Checkmate as well?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. My auntie, she lives in country Victoria, but she spent most of her life in Sydney, and she got introduced to Sam's mum. She's a lot older than Sam's mum, so my auntie actually took Sam's mum under her wing. She had a young child at the time, Sam's mum, and my auntie took her under her wing, and they remain friends to this day. I think Sam's mum was about 18 at the time. My auntie would have been 10, 15 years older, but they connected really, really well. And when Sam was setting up Living back in 2013, that's when Living started, my auntie actually reached out to me and said, you should connect with Sam because he's just started a mental health charity. So I reached out to Sam and just said, mate, there's a family connection here. I've never met you, but my parents know your parents, and my auntie's almost best mates with your mum. Let's catch up and just talk about what you're doing.
Wow. So you hadn't met up until that point? Wow.
No, I never met up until 2014. We met in Sydney. I think we're on Oxford Street at a pub in Sydney on Oxford Street, and we probably spoke for half an hour. I remember Sam at the time was training for a boxing fight, so he was all energised, ready to go to a boxing lesson of some sort, so we didn't have a lot of time. But we spoke for a good half an hour, and at that point in time, Living was at an interesting point because Living started by selling merchandise, and the merchandise arm of Livin grew at a rapid rate. People started to really gravitate towards Livin's merchandise, and they started
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's trendy, fashionable, but it goes to a wonderful cause. But at that point in time, Sam and Casey were thinking, gosh, we've got all this money coming in. What are we going to do with it? And that's when they registered to become a charity, and that's when they built out the Living Well program. So I kind of flicked them a bit of material that I used to deliver in the military. I'm not sure how happy the military would have been about that, but I removed anything sensitive from the training, and yeah, I just kept in touch since 2014. And as they started to build out this education program, I said I'm happy to volunteer and deliver it. And yeah, the rest is history. I've been involved now since 2014. Wow. And that program has evolved over the years too to something that's, well, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool program.
What is it, 45 minutes to an hour?
Yeah, 40. I usually rattle on for longer than I'm meant to, but 45 minutes is a typical Living Well program. The online program that we've developed because of COVID goes for probably 75 minutes, including question and answer time. But it's a 45-minute mental health awareness stigma reduction program delivered to hundreds of schools, hundreds of businesses now. Yeah.
So the focus obviously of Living is it ain't weak to speak. So it is about you said it there, awareness and stigma reduction.
Yep.
So what's the crux of it? You I know the answer to this, but for anybody listening, you come to our organisation.
Yep.
You deliver a session to our teams, either digitally or physically.
Yep.
What are we getting out of it? What are the subsequent benefits for us?
Yeah. So the program itself always begins with a pretty powerful introduction, because we've got so many different facilitators. We've got about 19 facilitators, each with their own unique lived experience story. So it usually starts with their story. And I've heard all 19 facilitators talk because I take them through training. And some of their stories are amazing. The adversity that they've overcome is incredibly empowering. So typically it starts with their story, and then it moves into a video about the genesis of Living. And the genesis of Living is a powerful story in its own right.
Yeah.
A sad story, but a powerful story.
Sure.
So Sam and Casey lost one of their best mates to suicide, and that's what kick-started their motivation to set up a mental health charity. So the video itself talks about the genesis of Living. It then moves into conversations around stigma and stigma reduction. It then moves into your typical warning signs and symptoms, so how you can be aware if somebody in your organisation, in your family, in your social group is struggling. Looks at ways that you can help those people who might be struggling, some really practical takeaway key things that you can do to help somebody. How to look after yourself, this thing known as self-care, so things that you can do on a day-to-day basis to look after your own mental health, and then where you can go to get professional support. And intertwined throughout the whole program is a whole lot of storytelling. There's a few fun activities in there as well. I'm sure you remember a couple of the activities. And the feedback's been phenomenal, mate. Yeah.
Can we pull apart for a second, because I'm sure there's people listening to this, they'll be drawn to this because of your background, and maybe they are going through their own sort of mental health challenges right now. What are the sort of warning signs, firstly, that we can look out for ourselves, and then secondly, as either an employee, a parent, a boss, a colleague, how can we look out for warning signs amongst people around us?
Okay. I'm going to throw this back to you first, and then I'll conclude with what I think is most important. What do you think are some of the warning signs and symptoms that could indicate that you are struggling or somebody around you is struggling?
So for me personally, I'd say it would be lethargy would be one big one. So not having the energy or even motivation to jump up out of bed. I guess everybody's different in that regard. I mean, I'm quite intrinsically motivated anyway, so I actually love jumping up and getting out of bed and going to work every day. So if I had one day where I felt that, wow, I don't actually want to go in today.
Yep.
Maybe that would be a big warning sign.
Yep.
For me, I'm going to go really obvious ones. Food, maybe not eating correctly.
Yeah, eating too much, not eating much at all.
Okay, both ways, yes,
Both
overeating
ways,
or undereating.
Weight gain, weight loss associated with that as well.
Being short with people, maybe
Yeah.
having a bit of a temper on you.
Yep. Being agitated, crying, explicitly telling people that you're struggling. Some people are very verbal.
Yeah.
And that's an obvious warning sign.
So there's different cries for help, right? There's an actual, genuine cry for help. Hey, I'm struggling here.
Yep.
But then there'll be a lot of people that kind of
Yes.
don't say anything.
Yeah, correct. So you've got your verbal cues. People that explicitly tell you they're struggling, or they might say, I don't feel like myself these days, or life would be easier if I wasn't around, to your telltale non-verbal warning signs, which you've covered off on. The list goes on and on and on and on, and it's very different for each individual. What I tell people, when it comes to warning signs and symptoms, the most important thing is knowing the people around you well. And if you notice any change in behaviour, that could be a warning sign that somebody is struggling. That could be your invitation to reach out and explore what's going on. So any change in behaviour is a warning sign, is a symptom that somebody could be struggling.
So if I'm in a working environment and I look at my team, a lack of productivity, not performing at the normal sort of rate that they do, maybe have a sick day when they don't normally have a sick day, anything like that. Pretty obvious, but it's the awareness, right? Yeah, okay.
The important thing though, we all have ups and downs in life. And all right, let's talk about physical health, right? Physical health exists along a continuum. At one end of the continuum, you've got physically feeling really well. At the other end of the continuum, you've got physically really unwell. In between is a whole lot of different things. You could have a little bit shaky, spiraling. Spiraling leads to unwell. Now, for the most part, most of us will wake up feeling physically all right most of the time. Like, I wake up most days and feel physically okay. And I'm sure most people, not everyone, most people would be in the same boat. But everybody at some point in time is going to get sick with a cold, a sore throat, a flu, where they might start to feel a little bit shaky. It's at that point in time that you can choose to take control of your health, do healthy things, drink plenty of water, get plenty of rest. You might up your multivitamin intake, whatever it is. It's at that point where you can choose to take control of your health. Typically by doing healthy things, you start to feel better about yourself. If you ignore the warning signs and symptoms of a flu and carry on working at 100 miles an hour, continuing to train at 100 miles an hour, it can go from being a little bit shaky to this point where you might start to spiral. And if you continue to do nothing about the warning signs and symptoms of a flu, when you're spiraling, you can quickly become very, very unwell. You might develop something like pneumonia. Now, if you suspected that you had pneumonia, what would you likely do?
Go to the hospital.
Yeah. You'd likely seek professional medical support, and by doing that, typically what starts to happen?
Probably get more unwell originally.
You start to feel better about yourself. You start to move from unwell back towards the well end of that continuum. The same is so true for our mental health. Most of the time we'll wake up feeling all right about ourselves mentally. But absolutely everyone from time to time will feel a little bit shaky mentally. It might be us lying in bed, tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, worrying about certain things. We might have a cry from time to time. We might get really angry and pissed off in the office for some reason. We might get really stressed about an upcoming presentation or an interview. These things in small doses are really, really normal. So when it comes to warning signs and symptoms, I think it's okay not to feel okay 100% of the time. But what you need to be mindful of, if these things last for 7, 8, 9, 10 days, it could be an indication that you've gone from a little shaky into that spiralling zone.
Yeah.
If it then goes on for 2, 3, 4 weeks, it could be an indication that you've become mentally unwell, that you may have developed a mental illness, and just like you do if you had pneumonia or a broken leg, that's the point in time where you really need to seek professional assistance. So warning signs and symptoms is an interesting one, because I think we all experience warning signs and symptoms on the odd occasion. But if these things persist for days and days and days on end, and you think to yourself, I don't actually want to feel like this, and this has been going on for a long time, I can't seem to shake it. And if it starts to impact on your ability to do the things that you want to do, the things that you can typically do without too much difficulty, put your hand up and seek professional assistance.
Because a long time, that's up to me to decide what a long time is, right? So I suppose it's hard to say there's a definitive rule that, Ryan, 5 days, that's your cut-off.
Yeah.
7, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think when you refer to most mental illnesses and the criteria to diagnose a mental illness, 2, 3, 4 weeks usually hits the criteria.
Yeah, okay.
So if these things are going on, for example, if you mentioned before, there might be some days where you're naturally intrinsically motivated, but there might be some days where you struggle to get out of bed in the morning. If that happened for 2, 3, 4 weeks, you'd be thinking to yourself, this ain't right, I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could be an indication that you got depression, could be an indication that you got really bad anxiety. Definitely an indication that you need to talk to somebody if it goes on for that long.
There was something that Sam said that really resonated with me. I said, I don't feel that I've ever had a level of depression or anxiety, so I don't know if I can relate. And he called me on it, and he said, Ryan, even if you had, you can't relate, because one person's depression is not the same as somebody else's depression, so it doesn't mean that they can relate to each other. Can you elaborate on that from a psychologist perspective?
Yeah, I totally understand Sam's line of thinking there, but I do think if you experience your own mental health challenges, and I've experienced my own mental health challenges throughout my life, I do think you develop a compassionate, growing empathy towards people that might be struggling. So I do think if you go through your own challenges in life, you might know exactly how somebody is feeling, but I do think you can have an appreciation, maybe a growing level of compassion, a growing level of empathy towards somebody that might be struggling. That would be my expansion.
Yeah. Yeah, nice.
Which would mean that you're probably more likely to be able to relate to that person. You might not know exactly how they're feeling, and you wouldn't want to tell them, I know exactly how you feel because I've had depression and you've got depression.
Yes.
But you could indicate that by going through your own challenges, there might be things that you've experienced that they might relate to.
Without undermining their journey right now, right?
Correct.
I'm sure there's things that could escalate their own challenges. So is there things that we could say that are wrong, that are categorically big no-nos?
Again, this is such a debatable topic, because when I talk, I tell people, okay, in short, Ryan, yes, there are things that you can say that would be hurtful. Like if you came to me and told me that you were struggling and I said, walk it off, you weak pussy. Hardly going to be helpful. We know that. That's obvious. But the research indicates that it is extremely difficult to say the wrong thing to somebody who's struggling if you approach them with the genuine intent to help them.
Okay.
So you might not say the perfect thing, but if your motivation is genuine, authentic, and you want to help them, there really is no right or wrong thing to say. as long as your intent, your motivation is to support them, to help them. Because if you say the wrong thing, you'll notice it in their reaction and you can correct yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, I haven't had a lot of training dealing with people who might be struggling, but I'm genuinely here to support you. I apologise if I may have offended you by saying X, Y, Z. Let me restart that.
Yeah.
You could say. But somebody that genuinely wants to help somebody isn't going to say, walk it off, pussy.
No.
Yeah.
But we hear it in businesses a lot of the time, right? Just get on with it, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But that made sense to me just then, because I'm not sure if you know this story, but my dad's been pretty sick for 19 years. He had esophagus cancer, so he's still with us today, but he's lost half his face. He's highly disfigured.
Yeah, right.
So he gets a lot of people staring at him when he goes out. He's had a lot of people, like more so kids and teens, would shout stuff at him. And during when he at the height of his illness, I guess you'd call it, and all the reconstructive surgery, a lot of his friends or even some of our family just veered away. And as I've spoke to them as I've grown up as well and felt confident to go to them, they're saying, well, Ryan, we didn't know what to say to him.
Yeah.
Because he was going through a depression. We had to remove mirrors from the house. So the whole house dropped into a depression, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, Ryan, we didn't know what to say. But what I'm hearing there is, it doesn't matter as long as you say something.
Yeah, as long as you say something and your intent is to support them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Approach them with authenticity, with the genuine intent to help them.
Instead of trying to think of a silver bullet language pattern that's going to solve all their problems.
Absolutely. Ryan, if you sat in on every one of my counselling sessions, I've said things that you'd go, why would a psychologist say that?
Yeah.
But my intent was always to try and help my clients. And I had an understanding about where I wanted to get to, the destination. Now, the journey to get to the destination was sometimes a really clunky journey. And I said some things that the client didn't necessarily appreciate, but rapport was strong. They knew that I wanted to help them.
Yeah.
So more often than not, they weren't highly offended, and it was easy to correct the things that might not have sat well with them because of my intent to help them.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Nice, mate. Last couple of questions. What's next for Luke? Where are you going on your personal journey, mate?
Mate, I'll always be heavily aligned with living. I'm in the office not every single day. and
that's on the Gold Coast, right? In Burleigh?
Yeah, it's in Burleigh. It's funny too, because I share an office with Casey, and Casey's one of my best mates, and he loves when I'm in the office, but I'm pretty vocal when I'm in the office, and I can annoy a lot of the staff. They might not say that, but I can tell that I annoy them. And
you got enough emotional intelligence to understand what...
Yeah. And I blab about research, and I can be quite distracting. So I'm not in the office every single day, but it's funny, Casey slowly has built up my desk. Like the other day I rocked up to work and there was a brand new keyboard there, which was like a subtle sign. Luke, here's a keyboard that you can use in the office. And then there was a mouse that appeared, and suddenly I've got a shelf, and he's like, you should put some of your books up on the shelf. So he's certainly encouraging me to be in the office more. But I do spend a lot of time in the office, I do. And the people that are associated with Livin are wonderful, wonderful people. So I'll forever be aligned with Livin.
Nice.
I absolutely will, but I'm also working on a couple of other things. I'm very, very interested in the men's mental health space. When you look at the statistics around mental ill health amongst men, it's staggering, and something needs to change. So I want to be a change maker in the men's mental health space. So I'm working on a bit of a side project with a couple of business partners, two brilliant psychologists. And we've got an investor, which is wonderful. You need money to kickstart some projects. Absolutely. And we're fortunate enough to have an investor involved. So Livin's aware of this, but I'm slowly working on a project in the men's mental health space, because it's just not acceptable, the statistics around men's mental health.
Yeah.
It's just not acceptable.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, and obviously with everything that's going on in the world right now as well, it's not going to It's not getting any better at the minute, is it?
Well, I don't have any, again, evidence to suggest that it's getting worse. But when you think about Australia presently in what, a recession, people are losing their jobs, people are stuck at home, people are becoming lonelier. When they don't have a job, when they feel lonely, they typically feel helpless and hopeless. Loneliness, hopelessness, helplessness are a recipe for disaster. So I can presume that mental health or mental ill health stats will rise as a result of COVID. In terms of suicide rates, again, this is based on no evidence, but I'm presuming that suicide rates might go up. Suicide statistics typically lag behind a lot of other statistics, so we won't know for some period of time.
Yeah.
But when I think about the state of people in isolation and lockdown, and just talking to some people, I fear that it could be pretty disastrous.
Yeah. And obviously the government they look like they're doing their bit. They're raising awareness around it as well. Are they doing enough in your opinion?
I think so, mate. How hard is it? How hard would it be to be a politician right
horrible.
now?
Yeah.
And you even talk to academics, professors, people that have worked in the mental health space for a long time. They don't have an answer. So I'm not really into politics. I don't watch a lot of news. But based on what I've heard, the government are trying.
Yeah.
They're allocating a lot of funding to mental health services, mental health organisations. So let's give them credit there.
Yeah, love it, mate. We'll finish on that. Where can everybody connect with you if they would like to reach out to you?
I'm not on Instagram. I didn't think I was on Facebook, but it was my birthday on the weekend, and people were sending me messages. I didn't know how they knew it was my birthday, and they said,
Facebook
we saw
knows.
it on your Facebook. So I'm going to have to go and revisit deleting that permanently, because I'm not a big fan of social media. Having said that, I am on LinkedIn, so you can, if you really want to connect with me, you can search for me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
More importantly, I'd probably reach out to Livin. So Livin is pretty popular on social media. At Livin.org.
Or .org, is it?
At Livin.org is Facebook and Instagram. At Livin.org is LinkedIn.
Yeah, okay.
And obviously we've got a website, so Livin.org.
Amazing, mate. Thanks so much. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Legend.
Beautiful.
Awesome.